All right. Hey guys, I'm Adam and welcome to House Church Preacher. This is a channel in which we'll discuss various topics on house churches, church history, the church fathers, theology, with the goal of it all to be to follow Christ in a greater way. If you're interested in any of these topics, please like and subscribe for more content. All right. Well, with that, let's dive into today's topic. So as I mentioned in an earlier video, I grew up in Wisconsin, and one of the required things that you had to do when you lived up in Wisconsin to be a state citizen is to be a Green Bay Packers fan. So for anyone in America, this is called football. For anyone in another country, this is called American football. And it is a big deal in Wisconsin. There was a college football coach named Bud Wilkinson, and he said football is defined as 22 people on the field desperately needing rest and 50,000 people in the stands desperately needing exercise. And in a way, I feel like this is a very good analogy of the church. The Sunday gathering is comprised of mostly a handful of people who are incredibly overworked and in need of a Sabbath. I mean, a pastor is statistically one of the most taxing jobs that somebody could possibly do. Those select few are the ones contributing to the Sunday gatherings, whereas hundreds or thousands, depending on how big the church is, they are mostly watching and they are desperately in need of actually doing ministry. So this begs the question, this is how church is currently, but the question is this how church was supposed to be done? And I would argue that we have strayed far and wide from how the church originally operated their gatherings. So with that, we're going to dive into a passage in 1 Corinthians 14. And interestingly, there's not a lot of passages that explain how the format of a church meeting should exactly look like, but this is the clearest scripture that we have in the Bible of what the earliest Christian meetings look like. Before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of a background first. As per usual, the church in Corinth was doing it wrong. So Paul had to instruct how a meeting should follow and should look like. So people were interrupting one another during the gatherings, and it was causing chaos and disorder. And what we read here is Paul's instructions to fix and bring correction to it. So we read in 1 Corinthians 14, 26 through 33, and I'll just read through it real quick. It says, "What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn, a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. If anyone speaks in a tongue, two or at the most three should speak, one at a time, and someone must interpret. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and to God. But two or three prophets should speak, and others should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop, for you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. The spirits of the prophets are subject to the control of the prophets, for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregation of the Lord's people." All right, cool. So what can we glean from this passage? In verse 26, it says that all of them were encouraged to prepare beforehand, bring something to contribute to the gathering that they have. And in multiple places, Paul is encouraging everyone to participate. As we said in verse 26, each of you, all of you. In verse 31, it says, hey, you can all prophesy. And notice that Paul is not making a distinguisher on who should or should not be participating in the gathering. His big stressor was that everyone would participate. And unfortunately, our mentality for church in America has mostly become a consumer mentality. Paul is encouraging and advocating for more of a contribution mentality where you come to bring something. Instead, what do we see on a Sunday morning? It's more about what we get out of it. And so I bring up an analogy of what I call for this for church. I call and refer to it as a potluck style meeting. Okay. As I mentioned before, we have food at all of our gatherings. So we have a meal every time, and people are expected and encouraged to bring food to the meetings and contribute with something food to share. But then also I say, hey, you also need to bring something spiritually to bless others. So whether that be something that the Lord has been teaching you during this past week, it could be a revelation that you had from the word. It could be a prophecy that God has given you to bring to the church. But I want to point out in this passage that notice that they weren't all bringing the same thing. They brought something that they could uniquely bring. It wasn't like everybody was all bringing tuna salad to the church gathering, right? To make an analogy of the food, right? Everyone was bringing something that they were able to contribute. So in verse 31, Paul gives general guidance that everybody that is contributing should just do it in order and that people should be respectful for one another. So to summarize, Paul's main points are for everyone to contribute to edify or build up the church with a priority for order, which today I am stressing the everyone part, right? Paul is calling out for everyone to contribute. And the reason why I'm stressing that part is because it is so different from what we have today. So that's the model that we see laid out in Scripture. Now I want us to discuss how churches are doing in this regard. So in keeping with the sports analogy that we were making earlier, discussing football, I'll be referring to the current model that we see in churches today as the professional sports model. And I'll refer to the model Paul is outlining as the intramural sports model. You'll see why as we compare the two. So first, let's look at the level of participation in both groups. In the professional sports model, we have a handful that play and thousands in the stands are sitting and watching the performance. Whereas for intramural sports, hey, you have a ton of much smaller teams and everybody gets to play, everybody gets to perform, everyone gets to do the sport. And today we see the same thing in churches on a given Sunday. The majority are sitting and watching when Paul clearly called out for the church to be more similar to an intramural sports game in which everybody is participating. Next, let's look at the level of skill. So professional sports, we have very, very few highly selected, highly skilled. It is the best of the best that we are watching perform. And intramural sports, it's maybe potentially gifted people, but it's not necessarily extremely high skilled. It is not the best of the best. It's everybody doing their best, but it might not be the best of the best. So again, we see the same thing occur in churches. Since churches, a majority of people watching the service, we need to have the best of the best, the cream of the crop up front and the top tier. If not, then since the majority of people are watching, we might say, unfortunately say it, we might lose viewers if we don't have a good performance. Next, let's dive into a level of preparation. For professional sports, obviously the people who are going to be playing, they train for a long time, they prep, they have the preseason, then they have the season. But the rest of the people who are coming to this sports game, they're just showing up to watch, right? They didn't practice it all that week. They maybe watched a podcast or something analyzing the game, but they didn't do anything physical to prep for it. Whereas in intramural sports, if you're playing a church league game or something like that, you need to train for the game. You prep for a while before the game comes. And why is that? It's because your performance directly correlates to how your team is going to be doing. So I want to ask a question. Do you get better at football by watching football or by actually playing football? You might get a little bit better by watching the game. You might learn some of the rules, with this formation, it's probably better to throw, whatever. But you get a little bit better, but you mostly would get better by playing football and learning as you actually walk it out. And to go back to the church, do you get better at doing ministry by watching a Sunday service or by actually contributing to a Sunday service? What if our mindset changed from us consuming on Sundays to contributing on a Sunday? What if we changed to a potluck mentality of a church where we all contribute and bring to a gathering? All right. So lastly, who's to blame for a bad game? All right. Might seem like a weird topic, but I'll explain it here. So in professional sports, let's say your team performs poorly that week. Who's to blame? Well, you blame your team, right? You become the critic of your team, and you can fall into two different categories. You can easily become the critic of your team, or you can become the super fan of your team. And we can idolize, professional sports players, and they are just the cream of the crop, right? And we get so fixated on our professional sports player, whether it be the quarterback or an NBA player. And in the same way, as a church, we can become the critic as we are a spectator to the service, right? Have you ever had it where it's like, oh, that teaching wasn't good this week. Oh, worship wasn't good. I don't like when that team is doing worship. Oh, I don't like the people that were doing this or that. Oh, the assistant pastor is here today. I don't like the messages that he gives, right? We become the critic, or we can also become the super fan where our whole church experience is all preoccupied around who your preaching pastor is. And I've seen this in many other churches where, they worship Jesus, but then they also have this God that's just under Jesus, and that's their pastor. So we can also fall into this as well, where we can idolize our pastor, where our pastor is the greatest person in the world, and he is just above any form of flaw or failure. So this sports analogy works on so many different levels. There's a term called a fair weather fan. And what is a fair weather fan? They are people that follow a certain team as long as they are good. And the moment that the team either transfers a star player or the team stops performing well, then they drop the team and they move to another team that they're rooting for. As an example, you can think of all of the people who became Tampa Bay fans when Tom Brady moved to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from the Patriots. And in the same way, in the church, we have people who jump from church to church for various reasons. Say the pastor retires or the pastor moves away. They then leave the church and go someplace else. So you can see that we are more aligned to the performance of our star athletes of our churches instead of being a part of a body of believers. All right, so let's jump back from the professional sports model to the intramural sports model. So who's to blame in that scenario if you had a bad game? And the answer is, it is your team, the team that you are playing on. You have direct ownership to your team's successes or your team's failures, since you are one of the players on the team. So whether you win or lose, you are a contributor to that outcome. And that really helps to get us out of being the critic or the super fan, since we are one of the contributing members. So unfortunately, you can see in this scenario as well, we, for the most part, do not follow Paul's instructions on how to carry out church. We follow a professional sports model, and that's why many of us are spiritually out of shape. That's why we have a lot of the symptoms and results that we see in church, is because it's more of a consuming and a spectator event than a contributing potluck style, if I can make that analogy. Okay, so you might be asking at this point, how do we apply all this, right? In a large church, unfortunately, it is something that is, for the most part, is not practical. Once your church gets to a certain size, you physically cannot have everyone contribute for a Sunday gathering. Have you ever seen a sports team of 500 people all playing at the same time? I didn't Google this, but I assume there is not a sport where there is a team of 500 people or, something in the hundreds. If you find one, please Google it. Please put a comment down in the comment section and let me know. So if you're a big church, unfortunately, you can't make this happen. But if you are in a house church, I would encourage you to find ways for everybody to be able to contribute. And you could be doing a house church, but you could be also not really doing the layout that Paul instructs. And to me, a leader's job is to guide the church, but it is not to be the only one doing everything. This is a very big danger where a leader can take control over everything. To me, I can see two main causes for it. The one is pride, where they think they are the smartest person in the room and they have better gifts than everybody else, and so they should be the one doing it. Or it's a lack of trust, where if I trust these people to do something, they might fail, they might mess up, et cetera, et cetera. You might also raise up a concern about doctrine, where I think part of the job of a leader is to be the referee. And what I mean by that is they are letting everybody contribute and they are letting everybody participate. But when something is foul, they will call the foul, right? The wrong attitude is to take control over everything in concern for doctrine, because then we're not fulfilling the instructions that Paul gave us. Paul gave us the instruction for everybody to contribute. And so a leader, you need to trust God and you need to lead well and lead people well. We don't lead well by just taking over everything and micromanaging every aspect of the gathering. So if you're a leader in a house church, I would encourage you to make it a goal to empower and train others up to do ministry. For some of you, you might not have a house church in your area. If you're part of a large church, I encourage you to get involved in a small group. I think this will be the best way for you to put the commands of Scripture into practice. And that's kind of your best bet if you're part of a large church. Because as I said, it's not something that you can do well on a Sunday gathering. If you're currently not attending a church or a small group of any sort, I encourage you to find one. And I want to stress this part. It is disobedience to not be involved in a church body. it is not the will of God for you to be a solo Christian doing your own thing. So to summarize, Paul wants us all to contribute during the Sunday gathering. And I think house church is the best format to make this happen. You might be asking a last question about how our church applies this. We have a house church group, a couple of house churches on the Space Coast area in Florida. So this is how we've laid out and tried to apply this passage. We usually have a formal teaching by one of the leaders or by someone who has a teaching gift that we might be training up and giving more of a leadership role. Although everyone should contribute, I do think Scripture is still clear on having leaders and also on having a formal teaching for the church. Then after the teaching time, we have a free-form discussion, and that's part of the church gathering. People may contribute to the topic that we've been discussing during the teaching, but sometimes we may even have people contribute with a prophetic word or something that God has been speaking to them throughout the week. And we might discuss that as well. But there is a free-form discussion where people are able to bring something that they want to contribute to the gathering as well. We strive for order in the meetings. And so we don't have people talking over one another. Everybody's respectful. It's a pretty good thing that we have going on. Then we have a time of prayer where there is more opportunities for praying. Possibly if someone is sick, we can pray for healing. If somebody's going through something, somebody might give a prophetic word during a prayer request. So our gatherings are, I want to stress this, our gatherings are in no way perfect. We are in no way super spiritual, where all of us hear from the Lord audibly every day, but we are just trying to orient our meetings to follow the commands that we just read that Paul laid out. So that was it for today. In the next video, we'll be discussing how this format of a church can quickly multiply leaders and as a result, multiply churches. So that's all for this episode. Let me know if you had any thoughts or comments below. God bless. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye. If you enjoyed watching this, please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I'm a new channel and it honestly really helps YouTube to share the video with more people. Also, please check out this video here as I think you will really enjoy it.